All right, guys, in today's video, we're going to be working on a noise that's coming back from the fuel tank area. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw a GoPro in the back of the bed of this truck, and we're going to take it for a drive so you can hear what I'm trying to diagnose here, and then we'll come back with proceeding with the actual diagnosis. All right, guys, so now that you've heard the sound, what that is the sound of the gas tank expanding and contracting, or contracting and expanding, right? Either or, it's going to make like a sound as the metal moves. And you don't want to ignore something like this because eventually all that flexing is going to introduce metal fatigue and hairline cracks in the fuel tank, and then you're going to end up having to replace it. So where is it coming from? Well, it's something to do with ventilation of the tank. This era vehicle doesn't have a sensor for us to measure what's going on with the pressure. So we're going to start with this line. What this line is this line runs all the way to the vent on the fuel module that's inside the fuel tank. And then it comes into this canister. This is part of the emissions control system. This is a canister is full of charcoal, and it attempts to capture the gas fumes and then suck them back off through this purge line and burn them in the intake manifold. So the first thing we're going to do this kind of diagnosis confirmation is we're going to release this line. Now this is really, really, really old plastic. But if we zoom in here, what you can see is there's some little serrations on this, and what the intent is for you to squeeze this, and it's supposed to move this little clip here and here to let go of this ridge on the pipe. If you give it a squeeze, that's what it's supposed to do. Don't use tools or it'll break. And if it breaks, you're going to have to replace it. So let's give this a shot and see if we can get it off. And you got to be super gentle, right? Because the hard plastic for this canister can just snap off too. So I'm just squeezing it, and then I got my index finger, and I'm trying to give it some upward pressure as I squeeze it. Let me try it this way. There it goes. Oh, thank God, nothing broke. All right. So what are we going to do? We're going to drive it on the same test drive circuit that we did to recreate the sound. And we're going to drive it like this. Now, why are we doing that? Well, if my theory's right, then one of two things is happening. Either there's a plug on this line as it runs back to the fuel pump module, or the module vent line itself is clogged up. And I'll show you a picture in just a minute of what I'm talking about in the back. If this test passes, then that's not the case. And the problem is going to be either in the canister being plugged up. You can see on this is a 2500, right? So the 3/4 ton and the 3500 1-ton trucks, this is just vented to air, just to the atmosphere. If you got a 1500 half-ton truck, there'll be a pipe here going into an EVAP vent solenoid. I'll show you a clip of that too. On these 3/4 and 1-ton trucks, you can see right here on the other side, the plug is just inserted into a dummy dongle. There's no solenoid here. This is nothing. It's just open to the air. In fact, I think this little guy just comes right off. Yep. Let me move the radiator hose to show you what I'm talking about, right? This just comes right off. It's just a diffuser for the air, and it sucks air right into that pipe right there. And what can happen over many decades is dirt and debris can get in there and plug it up. And that might be what's going on here. Okay, so we're going to go give it a drive. I'll say one other thing. You're going to smell a lot of gas fumes. We're going to be running like 1950s, 1960s pre-emission style stuff here. Don't be worried about that. If you've got a spark source, then you might want to fix that before you do this test, depending on how much fuel you got in the tank. Another thing with this problem is it's going to depend on how much fuel is in the tank. It's going to depend on the outside air temperature, and it's going to depend on the fuel temperature the longer you drive. This particular vehicle won't do this problem when it gets below 1/4 of a tank. This vehicle won't do this problem in the wintertime. It'll only do it when things warm up. So that's letting you know this kind of problem can be really tough to nail down. All right, let's give it a drive and see what we find out. All right, so let's take a look at the service manual for this model year. And what I wanted to show you in here is just what I was talking about on the fuel pump, right? So the fuel pump module looks like this. Sits inside the fuel tank for this 5.7 liter Vortec or 5.0 liter Vortec that this video is going to apply to. You can see you've got an inlet, a return, and then right in the middle here is the vent. This is the vent line. So that line I was talking about runs all along the frame rail of the truck and then connects to this guy. And so if the problem that I was describing was in the back end, it would either be that pipe or this piece here on the pump is plugged up or defective. And you'd have to replace the module likely to fix that. Typically, it'll be the line, not the pump. All right, guys, here's an example of a 1-ton. I zoom out a little bit here so you can see there's the pipe I was talking to you about. Then on the other side, you'll actually have a vent solenoid attached to the bracket. It uses a different bracket than the 3/4 and 1-ton trucks. All right, we ended up doing this test drive over 2 days just to be absolutely sure. A comment I'd give you is when you let it sit overnight, just kind of let this rest on top. You don't want to have insects think there's a nice place to nest in these holes and end up getting overcome by the fumes and die in here and create yet another problem. All right, so we didn't get the thunking driving like this. We could not recreate the problem. What does that mean? That means that from here all the way back to the tank, including the fuel pump module, is not the problem. So on this 2500 and a 3500 where there is no pipe here, the problem is most likely this canister being clogged up. We're going to go check, though, the purge line just to be sure that's not also part of the issue. So the purge line is all we have on a 2500 and a 3500. We don't have this vent line that I showed you in the previous clip. But let me show you in the service manual what's involved in both tests. So if you have a 1500, you'll know what to check because it could be this vent solenoid. All right, we're going to use the 98 service manual. This is a 98 K2500, and I'm just going to use this section of the diagnostic tree for the EVAP control system. Now we're going to skip a lot here because there was a special kind of cart-mounted piece of equipment in the service bay test, they called it, that did some testing and actually used, if we pan over here, right, you got this little port on the purge line, and that's for that special tool to plug in. So we don't have any special tools like that, so we're going to skip that part of the test. We're just going to pick it up here at step 5. This is how you would test if the purge solenoid valve is working correctly. So on this Vortec 5.7 liter, if we pan up a moment, and same for the 5 liter, this hose that we were talking about down here, this guy snakes around, and he comes up over here, and then he comes up over on the side. And if we go right over on the side here, right where my hand is down here, right? He comes in right here, and this thing right there, that's the EVAP purge solenoid. What that does is let vacuum pull fuel vapors into the intake manifold and burn them as an emission control function. So if we want to see if that's part of the problem, we're going to connect. They tell you to connect a vacuum gauge directly to that elbow I just showed you. Start and idle the engine. Use a scan tool to command that on to 100% and see if you get 12 inches of vacuum. If that passes, then you're going to go to step 6. You're going to disconnect the fuel tank vapor line, which is the one we disconnected for the test, and the EVAP purge line from the canister. You're going to plug the canister fitting for the vapor line. You're going to connect a vacuum to the purge line, and then you're going to run that same test with the EVAP valve commanded closed. Now I can't run that test on a 2500 because we don't have a vent valve. We only have a purge valve on these big trucks. But that's what you would do if you had a 1500, and then you'd use a hand pump to apply vacuum and make sure that it's holding at 5 inches of mercury. And if that was the case, they would tell you to go to step 9. And then again, you'd have to go, if you look at step 9, this is again requires this diagnostic station. So you're not going to be able to go any further with that. But if it's a no, they're going to tell you to come down here. They're going to tell you to leave it connected the way you had it here. Disconnect that vent line from the vent valve, plug it, use a hand pump, and see if you get 5 inches that way. And then they're going to tell you, well, if you don't get that, then you need to look for a leak in that vent line from the canister to the vent valve. And if it does work, they're going to tell you to go to 15. And then 15 is going to say that you want to start checking for an electrical problem, a circuit problem. So I'm not going to go into this anymore because we don't have a vent valve on this truck. Now the lines they were talking about, this is the fuel vapor line. This is the purge line. And then this would be the hose to the vent line if you had a 1500. Again, this is a 25. It doesn't have it, neither does a 35. All right, so like everything else, it's brittle plastic. This is probably the most brittle of all, this white kind of plastic. You can see on the side here, it looks like there's a wing that's supposed to be here. It's already broken off at some point in this part's life. It's supposed to look like just the one I'm tapping here on the other side. And then there's a little locking tab right there. So if this guy doesn't go this way, he goes this way. And so if you look straight down on this elbow, you can see this white piece. It's got to go in like that, just like that. And that should release the tab on this side. Now, I'm going to try to coax it off while I push it in with the screwdriver here. Perfect. All right, so what happens here is there's this ridge, just similar to this guy here, except it's a different design. So this ridge gets held in by this piece here, and when you push it in, it lets you get past it. All right, so now we've got this free and this free. So what we're going to do is I'm going to hook a vacuum line up into this guy that's approximately this size. I'm going to start the vehicle up, and I'm going to see if we get that vacuum reading coming out of the purge valve. I'm not going to hook the vacuum up directly at the valve end. I'm going to hook it up here and kill two birds with one stone. That's going to test this line for me at the same time. All right, so we've got a vacuum gauge hooked up to some clear tubing. We've reduced it down so that it fits inside this purge line, and then I'm holding it in so that it stays put. Here's the vacuum line here. Here's our Tech 2. We're showing 0% on the duty cycle. We're going to start walking this up, and we're going to try to get this both in view at the same time. So as we walk this up, you can see the vacuum gauge is increasing. We get this up to 100%. We're sitting at like 11 or 12, right between 11 and 12. I'd say 11.5 inches of mercury, and that specification is okay. We walk right back down, and she drops back down to 0. So this particular truck, the EVAP solenoid, is fine. All right, so with this test is all we can do on this truck. I showed you guys how you might go about testing the vent valve if you have a 1500. This whole test may have caused some codes that we'll have to clear out, but at this point we're ready to call the EVAP canister as the problem, and we're going to switch this out. This bracket is held in by one screw over here with a nut. You can see right here where my finger is. Let's go get a deep socket because of the length of this bolt, and let's get it out of there. All right, so 10 millimeter. There's not a lot of room to work on here because in the front where my ratchet is, we've got a very fragile little bracket that's holding the front four-wheel drive vent axle tube. Just want to get this started with this, hopefully finish it off the rest of the way by hand. Yeah, okay. You can see as I turn this captive nut, it's opening up this bracket. That gap right there is getting larger, and that's going to let us be able to pull this canister out. All right, let's see if that's far enough. We're going to take this wiring harness clip off that would normally go to the vent solenoid. Come on. And we'll put that on the new one when we get it replaced. Okay, so she's loose, but I'll take this little diffuser cover off. See if we can get this guy tucked under here. Nope, might have to loosen it a little more. This is a pretty easy repair as far as what we're about to do here. It's just it's a hard deal to diagnose. Let's see if that's enough to lift it out. Almost. She's in there tiger tight. It looks like to have it come out, you're going to have to get it at the full extent of its travel. The full extent. I wish I could get something like an electric ratchet to fit in here, but don't want to break our little front axle vent tube clip. All right, let's see if that's enough for it to be happy. She is just going to fight us to the bitter end here. I'm going to go get a box end wrench, guys. Should have just used this tool to begin with. Yeah, this is going to probably want us to completely separate this bracket, is what I'm seeing. It's not going to be enough just to loosen it up. So I'm just going to take the nut all the way off of the bracket end. Set this guy right here. And then open this bracket up and stretch it a little bit. And even with that, she's still fighting us. Finally. All right, that's our guy. Let me show you what we're replacing it with. All right, we're going to replace this with an AC Delco 215-179 or a GM 1711-3330. This is going to be the correct number for every truck in the video title model years except for the Suburban and the 3/4 ton with the auxiliary fuel tank. And the reason for that's pretty simple, right? Those two have a larger fuel tank capacity, and because of that, they will need to have a different internal composition to this guy to filter the vapors from that. I saw this cardboard here. Additional vapors that they generate, right? It's all self-contained. It is not anything you can open up and service. If we look down in there, we can see there's like a foam filter on this vent. That could even be one of the places that can get clogged up on it. We'll take a look at the old one in a minute, but it's all easily marked for you with tank and purge. All right, so we're going to slide this guy back into this bracket. Get him into his little home down there. And close this up. On this nut back down by hand initially. Trying not to have this guy fall down and disappear on me. Ahead and snap this in. We can go ahead and snap this in. Go ahead and put this diffuser back on. There's no torque value on this. I'll show you in the service manual. They just want you to snug it up. And we'll just tighten it back up, snug enough to match, well, the way we found it with these two bands closed up together. Just trying to hold this band closer to the body of the canister while I tighten it and try to keep giving you guys a view so you can see what I'm doing. You don't want to over tighten it because you could crack the new canister. Just want to snug it up. All right, everything's in and we are ready to give it another test drive. We're going to confirm that we still don't get the thunking with this. I'll come back, I'll show you the pages in the service manual and we'll take a look at the old one. Forgot to bring our little wiring harness dongle connector up here. All right, now we're ready to do a test drive. So there's not much in the manual about this procedure, right? Just disconnect the hoses, loosen up the screw from the bracket and pull it out, and then reverse it to put it in. So there's really nothing to share here, but I'll show it to you just for another view and drawing of the pieces that are involved with that. In the previous page, they talk about replacing the vent valve, this guy here on the 1500s, but again, they don't really give you much. This guy kind of slides in. I'll show you. I have one of these, even though it's not for this truck. I'll show you in a minute. It kind of snap fits into the bracket is how it attaches. They talk about bending the tang on the bracket. I'll show you what they're referring to with that. And then the only other thing in the service manual, cleaning. So, what if you had your line back to the fuel tank was actually the problem than what we showed? Or when we did this vacuum test, we found that the line to the purge solenoid was the problem. Nitrogen gas is what they use to blow these lines out with, and that's what I would have used if I had that problem as well. This is all part of some big tool they have. At the end of the day, if you read through it here, it's nothing but nitrogen gas, right? So it's just a nitrogen cylinder. That's all that's on this tool, so you can do that yourself. All right, I'm realizing when I did the previous clip, I didn't point out the different number for the Suburbans and the 3/4 tons with the auxiliary tank. They're going to just be one digit difference, so it'll be a 31 or a 180 at the end for that other one. I'll put that down in the description. The other part I wanted to show you was if you have the half ton, this is the part number for the vent valve assembly, 1711 3529 or an AC Delco 214 2214. If that ended up being related to the issue, and it could be on the half ton trucks, because the problem at the end of the day has to do with this vent either way. And what one of these looks like, okay, so this thing will come with the bracket. The bracket on both the one we have here and this one just has these tabs that fit into the side of the inner area. There's the nut we were working on that opens this bracket up. And you can see this just slides onto this tang here. That's what the service manual is referring to. And then this hose goes on the top of the canister. Electrical connections right here. And this guy here has openings in the bottom to let air go in. He controls what air goes in and out of the canister. So that's his function. All right, guys, if we take a look at the old one here, and so the only way this guy can get kind of plugged up is if there's an issue with this vent opening. So if you look in here with a pick, let's see if I can get the light where I can see and you can see, and we zoom in here. So there's a lot of dirt and crud that's in here on top. So it's not like we can see on the other one where it's nice and clean. So you might definitely give a shot at trying to blow some of this stuff out. I personally don't think that that's a long-term fix, but it could be a temporary fix. And at this point right there's the kind of like the foam is right there. So we could probably get some more of this dirt out. There's like a wing of a dead insect or something in there too. It's just, 26, 27 years of accumulated crud. This is the original one from 98. But I'm sure that is a contributing factor, but not the only factor. Certainly the carbon in here is not doing any job at filtering the fumes either. But you might want to give that a shot. Take a look at that. See if you can clean it out. It might buy you some more time with the problem until you get a chance to pick up a new one. All right, guys, that's about it. We're all done. This repair is holding up. No more thunking, no more thanging, no more twanging. We got that problem fixed, and that way our gas tank will last a lot longer. If you got questions or comments on what we did in this video, put them down below and I'll try to help. If this video saved you some money by teaching you how to diagnose and repair this yourself and get the parts on your own, I'd appreciate you paying it forward by hitting that like button. And as always, thanks for watching.